Hello, I'm John Kirk, and welcome to a great show here on this Sunday afternoon. Tonight, John and I will take you on a journey on some of the most important times in American history, the 80s and 90s.
Well, hello, yes, I'm John Howley, and our first target is prime time with Ronald Reagan. When he was elected president in 1980, his message was clear.
In the days ahead, I will propose removing the roadblocks that have slowed our economy and reduced productivity. Steps will be taken aimed at restoring the balance between the various levels of government.
His inaugural address was indicative to both liberals and conservatives to the onset of the so-called Reagan Revolution.
To top it off, the day that Reagan took office, Iran announced it would release the American hostages after 444 days of captivity. Three aging Russian leaders, beginning with Leonid Brezhnev in 1982, died suddenly, thereby greatly reducing the influence of the Soviet Union.
Additionally, Reagan viewed the economic downturn at the time as an opportunity to push for his revolution in government. His Reaganomics combined a monetaristic fiscal policy, supply-side tax cuts, and domestic budget cutting. Supply-side economics describes a macroeconomic theory that argued economic growth can be created by investing in capital and by lowering barriers on the production of goods and services. Specifically, with the Economic Recovery Act, ERTA, lowered income taxes over the following 3 years by 25%, capital gains by 40%, and investment income rates by 28%.
At the same time, despite his tax cut victories in the political arena, continued recession, rising interest rates, and crippling federal deficits sent the stock market into a tailspin. Moreover, the 1980s saw an acceleration of the trend towards outsourcing high-wage industrial jobs and polluting industries to areas such as Mexico and Asia. Thus, even as the economy grew and inflation dropped below 2%, unemployment hovered above 6% and poverty levels ranged from 11 to 15%.
No doubt, John. Another interesting topic of the time was the global warming. Many conservatives were highly skeptical of the growing alarms over global warming. The National Climate Program Office, created by Carter, was viewed by Reaganites as an outpost in enemy territory.
On foreign affairs, Reagan looked to standing tall in a chaotic world. He described the Soviet Union as the evil empire. His plan to defeat that enemy centered on a massive buildup of the American military. Talk of standing tall also spread fear, and Reagan's administration even proposed a strategic defense initiative in 1983, also known as Star Wars, which called for a land or space-based shield against a nuclear attack. Although SDI was criticized and in violation of the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, Congress approved billions of dollars for development.
Well, John, that brings up an interesting point, as the combination of massive defense spending and tax cuts created huge deficits. That drove up interest rates and thus the value of the dollar. Lower prices gave imports such as Japanese autos a large competitive advantage over American producers.
All true. Shifting gears, though, towards the Middle East was where tensions began to flare. In 1982, Israel invaded neighboring Lebanon to destroy missiles supplied by Syria, a Soviet client state. International outrage over the massacre of Palestinians in Israeli-controlled camps forced Sharon to withdraw his troops. Reagan then decided to send American troops to Beirut, Lebanon's capital, to protect the Palestinians and keep the peace. Muslim radicals responded first by bombing the American embassy and then, in October 1983, a U.S. Marine barracks. Some 239 troops died. Confronting a chorus of criticism, Reagan withdrew the American troops.
By mid-1985, Iranian-backed terrorists continued to hold hostages in Lebanon. The president made it increasingly clear that he wanted to find a way to free the remaining hostages, but an agreement to exchange arms for the hostages would violate the president's vow never to pay ransom to terrorists. The man most pulling the strings was Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North. In January 1986, he hit on the idea that became called Iran-Contra, in which the profits made selling arms to Iran could be siphoned off to buy weapons from the Contras, anti-Sandinista government Nicaraguans.
Eventually, when the press got a hold of the secret Iran-Contra operation in the fall of 1986, they nicknamed the scandal Irangate, comparing it to Nixon's Watergate affair. However, this scandal revealed a presidency out of control, as an unelected segment within the government had taken upon itself the power to pursue its own policies outside legal channels.
Other conflicts began to boil over towards the tail end of the 80s, eventually leading to the Gulf War. It stemmed from Saddam Hussein, the ruthless leader of Iraq. From 1980 to 1988, the United States supported Iraq with weapons and intelligence as they clashed with Iran. But when Hussein ran up enormous debts, he looked towards the small oil-rich Kuwait, to which he then invaded in August of 1990 and occupied, catching the Bush administration off guard. the new president inaugurated in 1989, George H.W. Bush, compared Hussein to Hitler and was determined to free Kuwait.
On January 17, 1991, air attacks by France, Italy, Britain, Saudi Arabia, and the United States launched Operation Desert Storm. Ground operations shattered Hussein's vaunted Republican guards in less than 100 hours. By the end of February, Kuwait had been liberated and nothing stood between Allied forces and Baghdad, which led to Iraq's defeat.
Some good things were there, but the shifting gears back to America, it is important to notice developments in culture at the time and how it translated in such forms as entertainment and movies.
True, a number of movies highlighted some of the issues along with violence, such as the 3 Rambo movies, Wall Street, Terminator, Mad Max, War Games, and more. War Games was a film where the United States creates an online program to learn how to respond to hypothetical Russian nuclear attacks. Rambo 1 and 2 dealt with issues revolving around Vietnam. Sylvester Stallone as John Rambo is a troubled and misunderstood Vietnam veteran who demonstrated how Vietnam vets were seen as baby killers, not as heroes.
No doubt. And who could forget the rise of Michael Jackson, a pop superstar from the 70s up to the turn of the century. As a result of his work, he was known as the King of Pop, and in 1984, he became the first artist to win 8 Grammy Awards in a single night.
Oh, and you can't forget technology and the growth of the World Wide Web in the 1990s. It established orderly system for distribution and retrieval of electronic information. Technological innovations in the internet and wireless communication fueled increased national productivity and made e-commerce a part of American life. Online merchandiser Amazon.com began to challenge such giant brick-and-mortar retailers as Walmart and Target.
Well, John, I think that brings us towards the end of our segment. The election of 1992 brought Governor Bill Clinton of Arkansas to the scene, who gained ground by hammering away at Bush for failing to revive the economy. "It's the economy. Stupid," read the sign at his election headquarters, and he did ride that support in order to win the presidency.
Alright, ladies and gentlemen, hello, I'm your host, Johnny Kirk, and for our next segment tonight, we have a very special guest with us, Mr. William Jefferson Clinton, the 42nd President of the United States.
Thank you. It's great to be here with you, Mr. Kirk.
Same to you, Slick Willie.
I'm sorry, what?
Oh, I apologize. Was that not the name given to you by the media as a result of your sexual scandals and supposed legal dealings?
Well, let's not focus on that. I feel that defining my presidency by a couple of harassment lawsuits and supposed illegal dealings would be unfair, would it not?
You're right, Bill. Let's talk about how you quickly turned heads coming into the office by attempting to eliminate the rule banning homosexuals from serving in the military.
Yes. You see, I made a pledge to the American gay community that I would fight to get them more rights in the country, and this was one way I fulfilled this promise. Although I could not fully allow gay soldiers to serve in our military due to conservative resistance along with resistance from the military, I was able to come to a compromise. It became known as Don't Ask, Don't Tell. This means that as long as gay soldiers kept their sexual orientation private, they could not be denied service in the military.
Well, that seems like a big step for the homosexual community. Now, Bill, I know you probably don't want to talk about this, but I have to bring up Whitewater. You know, the accusations that both you and your wife, Hillary, received special treatment from a failed real estate venture known as Whitewater while you were governor of Arkansas?
Well, Kirk, all I have to say is that Judge Kenneth Starr, the special prosecutor appointed by Attorney General Janet Reno, along with 2 Senate committees, figured that there was no evidence to provide that Hillary nor I acted illegally in our ventures in Whitewater. Case closed.
Fair enough, but while we're on the subject, what do you have to say about Paula Jones, the former Arkansas state employee who filed a sexual harassment suit against you during your presidency?
Found not guilty.
Well, that doesn't sound too convincing. Also, you brought up Judge Kenneth Starr, and so that leads us right into the Lewinsky affair. Remember this? You remember this headline right here? Do you? Do you remember this one? Wasn't he the same prosecutor who pushed for your impeachment after he found tapes of you and Monica Lewinsky speaking of your intimate relationship, and you swore under oath before hearing tapes that you did not have such a relationship?
Sure, a majority of the House voted 3 articles of impeachment for lying to the grand jury, suborning perjury, and orchestrating a cover-up, but most Americans agreed that while my private life may have been questionable, it didn't affect the public. You see, Kurt, there's a distinction between public and private actions. Besides, I was acquitted by my boys over at the Senate, so no harm done, right?
Sure, Bill. Well, I guess you've had your fair share of scandal, but let's move on to the more serious pinnacles of your presidency.
I would love to.
Alright, so in your first speech to Congress, you proposed a program that began reducing the deficit, as well as providing investments to stimulate the economy and repair the nation's decaying public infrastructure.
Yes, I did. And over these last 8 years, success we have achieved. By 1999, the rate of unemployment dropped to 4.1%, the lowest in nearly 30 years, while the stock market has reached new heights.
Alright, don't flatter yourself, man. In the beginning of your presidency, the year 1994, healthcare reform topped your agenda, if I do say so. A task force led by your wife developed a plan to provide health coverage for all Americans. And yet, a host of groups attacked this proposal. The failure of the healthcare reform heightened the perception of an ill-organized administration under you.
Well, let's look elsewhere.
Typical Bill.
So in 1996, I signed into a law sweeping reform of welfare. For the first time in 60 years, the social welfare policies of the liberal democratic state were substantially reversed. Food stamp spending was cut, and the law placed a 5-year limit on payments to any family. Most adults receiving payments were required to find work within the next 2 years.
Great, Bill. That's splendid indeed. Let's look foreign, shall we?
Sure, Kirk.
What's a NAFTA? Tell me.
Well, the North American Free Trade Agreement. With the promise of greater trade and more jobs, the pact has linked the United States economy more closely with those of Canada and Mexico.
Great, man. Cool. Continued on this foreign tangent, let's look at the tail end of your administration and the issues in Bosnia and Kosovo.
Sure. It's truly devastating stuff.
Yes. Took you a while, though, didn't it? After Bosnia became independent in 1992, both sides, but especially the Serbs, resorted to ethnic cleansing. Serbs even set up rape camps where they brutalized Muslim women, and yet the United States initially viewed the civil war in Yugoslavia as Europe's problem. Once the civilian death roll, hit that quarter million mark, you committed and supported the NATO by bombing of Serb forces.
I regret doing this. Yes, the American people were concerned about getting bogged down in another Vietnam-esque civil war, but Kirk, it was the spring of 1999 where I committed U.S. forces to a NATO bombing campaign that forced Serbia to agree to a NATO occupation of Kosovo. Once again, our American troops entered as peacekeepers.
Sure, Bill, and you can't forget 1998 and last year, where you engaged in some negotiating sessions.
I would prefer to call them marathon negotiating sessions. And yes, let's keep it to, I engaged them in hopes of hammering out an agreement that would allow for separate Palestinian state alongside Israel.
Splendid, man. Well, what do you think about the recent presidential race? Your vice, Al Gore, couldn't come through, huh?
Yeah, the Supreme Court has made George W. Bush our new president.
You a little mad about this, Bill? Gore was your vice president.
No comment.
All right, I guess that wraps up our segment for tonight. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and have a great night.